Shades of Magic as a series, again, a thesis for all of them, right? I wanted to write a portal fantasy. I've always loved fantasy, but I fall more in the C.S. Lewis than the Tolkien camp, meaning I like a fantasy novel that has a point of departure from reality. Whereas Tolkien's books, you're only ever going to experience this world through the pages of that book. C.S. Lewis teaches you there's a wardrobe somewhere in your house, that it has a false back and it's going to lead you into magic. So I love a portal fantasy. But I also wanted to write, instead of writing multiple worlds, I want to write one world 4 ways. It's like one ingredient, 4 meals, right? And so I decide that instead of writing vastly different geographic places, I'm going to write the identical geography, like the scaffolding of a house. And I'm going to build 4 different versions of reality onto it based on the population's relationship with magic. So we have our world where magic has been forgotten, one world where magic is revered, one world where magic is enslaved and therefore it withdraws, and one world where magic became so powerful it consumed everything. Now, the walls have been put up between these 4 worlds so that after that magical incident where it consumed everything, they don't want travel between them. And these Antari magicians, this dying race, because they kind of relied on cross-pollination of magic, they are the only ones who have the ability to carve doors in the walls between worlds. So they are the only ones who have the ability to still ferry messages, to still communicate back and forth across the lines between these worlds. And so is Shades of Magic. And one of them, our main character, Kel, happens to also have a side business smuggling objects between those worlds. And he gets his pocket picked by a cross-dressing thief named Delilah Bard, and chaos ensues. I'm a really firm believer with regards to the rules of magic in making them as organic and as intuitive as possible. The fact is, when you write fantasy novels, every step you take away from reality is a step you lose a reader. So the closer you can stay to reality, the more readers you're going to retain. And so for me, as complicated as the magical systems can become when we build on them, at their core, at their fundamental level, I keep them as simple and intuitive as possible. I particularly like to use elemental magic because elements are a thing we have in our everyday life. We understand fire, we understand earth and water. I also was raised on anime. My favorite animes were these love letters to elements. It was Avatar: The Last Airbender. It was Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood. It was a sense of like magic and order and the natural world. And the fact is, you may not be able to come to my book with an understanding of magic, but I bet you come to my book with an understanding of how a tree grows. It has roots, it has a trunk, it has branches. If I can reduce my explanation of magic to make you think of a tree, now all of a sudden you can understand that. So I really love to keep it natural, keep it intuitive, and keep it organic. You can build complex branches and flowers and systems, but like the roots and the foundation, I think, should be extremely easy to grasp. I'm the kind of writer for a lot of readers who think they don't like fantasy. So I'm trying to convert you. And one of my goals of conversion is to draw you into the story, regardless of the trappings, as quickly as possible. Again, going back to that anime school, one of my favorite things about classic anime is that it didn't tell you anything up front. It dropped you in and you learned everything that you needed from the context, from the conflict and the character. And so when I'm building worlds and rules, I often limit myself to things that my characters will engage with. I always say, you do not need to design a 5-course meal if no one in your book ever stops to eat. You need to understand what your characters are going to engage with, what's going to bring conflict, and what's going to bring the normals and the strange parts to their world, and build your world and your magic out from the people that actually engage with it. Yeah, I like to cut forward a little bit in time because I always want my reader to feel like they're coming in the middle of something. And that allows for us to have referential flashback. It allows for us to for instance, in Gathering of Shadows, we learn that Lila Bard has been learning magic. But instead of just showing her learning magic in order, we flash back to those interim months of her learning magic when she is needing to use that magic in the context of a tournament. So when she finds herself using fire magic in a tournament for the first time, we cut back to her on the ship with Alucard in those 4 months learning fire magic. And so it just adds a little bit more dynamism, I think, than going strictly in order all the time. Plus, it gives us some room to play because we're not accounting for every minute on the calendar on the day. We are allowing you to say, okay, a little bit of time has gone past. Between Conjuring of Light and the next series is 7 years. So I like to give myself some play so that I always have things you have missed. So that now I love to introduce characters that are already in relationships with each other so that you're not showing up and pointing a finger and being like, oh, look, It's you. One of the best examples I heard of this recently was if you look back at Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark, when Indiana Jones sees Belloc, his like nemesis on screen for the first time, he doesn't go, "It is Belloc. We have met." Da, da, da. Like you can just tell these dudes hate each other. And that to me is so much more interesting than seeing the day they first met. I plan all my books in reverse. So, for instance, when I started to write A Darker Shade of Magic, I already knew how A Darker Shade of Magic would end and how A Conjuring of Light would end. I need to know the end game so that I can rewind the entire story and the characters and figure out where we first meet them. So I'm a deep planner. I do it not because I'm extremely clever, but because I'm extremely anxious. And I find that I get very anxious about not having the story pieces. And therefore, I don't enjoy the act of creating as much. Whereas when I have a mission, when I have a plan, I still have a finite amount of distance I need to cross to get there. But it takes kind of a desert and it makes it a football field, right? Like it's an amount. And if I know what I'm working toward, I know how to build the themes. I know how to build the conflict because I know we're going to land here and it's going to be delicious. So a lot of the culmination in Conjuring of Light was seeded in A Darker Shade and in Gathering. And I knew that it was coming, but it was still quite a lift. So I was about halfway through writing A Conjuring of Light when I realized I had another story I wanted to tell, which was a disaster for me because, as I said, I plan all of my books from the end, and I was like, uh-oh, we are 200 pages from the end of Conjuring of Light. This can't be happening. But one minor character, she would be insulted to be called minor, a smaller character, makes a trade with Lila Bard, one of our tentpole characters, for a favor. And I knew at the writing that she was not going to be able to call in the favor in Conjuring of Light. And rather than rush a conclusion on that plot point and make it feel unsatisfying, I decided I'm going to hold it. I'm going to let it be an open window, and I'm hoping I'm going to come back to it. And so by the time I actually finished writing Conjuring of Light, I already had the idea for what would become the Fragile Threads of Power. Shades of Magic's books 1, 2, 3, Threads of Power is basically 4, 5, 6. You could technically start with Threads of Power, but I think you should probably start with Shades for all the added nuance. And essentially, the Fragile Threads of Power starts 7 years after the end of Conjuring of Light. We follow the surviving cast from Conjuring of Light, but we also add a brand new cast of characters and some brand new conflicts and dangers and political intrigues and all of these things. So in many ways, it was like coming home. In other ways, it's like a brand new start, a brand new foray into the world. Aging characters is a real big challenge. And so having time gaps between books or between a series is tricky. It's dangerous. I will say in some ways it felt like I gave myself a gift because once a book becomes a book, it's static. It can't change anymore. But as authors, we continue to change. And so while I built in this 7-year gap for my characters, it was a little bit of a guess as to how long it would be before this book came out. I grew 7 years as well. And so it allowed for a little bit of flexibility in the fact that, yes, my characters were aging, but so was I. And so my writing style was allowed to age with me, rather than me going back to these books, setting the books a day after the end of Conjuring of Light and having to then almost mimic a previous version of my writing self. It allowed me to grow with the characters. It also, I think 7 years, is it 7 years that like every cell in our body changes? I think it's right around there. So it felt like a prophetic amount of time. It also meant taking these characters who were in their early 20s to basically 30. And, considering I started this Shades of Magic series at 25 and I wrote Threads of Power at 35. I get it. There is a fundamental difference. So it was less about changing these people and letting them become more of who they are, letting them mature a little bit. And yes, they absolutely still have aspects of themselves the same way I have aspects of who I was when I wrote A Darker Shade of Magic, but their values have codified a little bit. Some have been rewritten. They have new existential crises, as there are always existential crises to be had, but it allowed me to allow them to grow with me instead of being left behind. I really am a firm believer that an age gap can be done really well. You have to create characters that the reader believes continue to exist even when they're not being read. This has always been the biggest goal of my career, is I don't want my character's existence to feel contingent upon your attention. I want you to believe that when you put the book down, when you are no longer invited to read their story, they continue living it. And so the greatest trick was to, when you come back to these characters and this new book to feel like they have had 7 years of life, of experience, that I'm not, even though I'm only counting a few of them in the book, they need to feel believably like they have been living every day you've been away from them. One of the best examples I can give is that at the end of Conjuring of Light, Kel's magic is shattered. He is gravely injured in Conjuring of Light to the point where he can no longer. This is a character for whom magic was as easy as breathing. He is an Antari magician. Literally, magic comes to him like oxygen. And at the end of Conjuring of Light, it's broken. And so in the beginning of those 7 years, he is trying to learn how to live a life without magic. And over the course of those 7 years, he has to redefine who he is as a person in a world where he cannot rely on this ability. Not only that, but in a world where the sheer attempt to use magic causes him excruciating pain. It's like a phantom limb. And so he essentially has to redefine. And in those 7 years, we see him through some flashbacks and also through some inference, go through a massive amount of crisis and come out the other side with a new version of his identity and that Lila helps. That's a sign of maturity from Lila Bard, a character who's famously self-interested, is that she's essentially searching the world for a cure. She's searching everywhere to help this person that she loves, who is in so much pain. And because she cannot do that, she teaches him how to be a better fighter with weapons because he doesn't have magic anymore. And so their transformation and their love language of helping each other through the dark is one of the pieces I'm most proud of. What's amazing is the two new protagonists that I'm most excited about are both like adolescent girls, which is not a thing I actually anticipated when I set out. I mean, it's a very adult series. And yet, you know, if the thesis of Shades of Magic is this idea that power kind of makes us worse, it's a corrupting force, it enables us and therefore enables our worst selves. In Threads of Power, there are two teenage girls. One is named Tess and one is Kosuga. Kosuga is the queen of one of the worlds, and she's 14. She has been forced into this position. And Tess is essentially a teenager on the run with the ability to manipulate the threads of reality around her. And they have extraordinary power. And they're not inherently bad, but everyone is trying to use them for bad things. And I love it. There's something about them. They are so quintessentially different as young women, and yet they have so much potential for good that they end up as these kind of objects of other people's ambition. I definitely, one of the things I'm most excited about for the series as a whole is that traditionally have like emphasized the magical threat. In this book, there is both a magical threat and a mortal threat. We have two. We have a bifurcation of villainy. We have a supernatural element, and we have a very domestic element. We have terrorists, basically. We have rebels that are trying to take Rai Maresh off the throne, who believe that he is responsible, or who are at least spreading the word that he is responsible for magic ebbing. And so there is a plot, there is an uprising, there is a very mortal form of villainy, and readers should not take that to mean that there is not also a magical form of villainy at work, because I definitely set myself a goal to have both in play. The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, it's interesting. This is my standalone novel that has so far in my career been my most famous. It sold more than 1 million copies in its first year alone. It is ironic because it came out during the pandemic, and it is a novel about hope. So I think it may have landed well for that. The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue is based on an idea that I had in my early 20s. I actually had the idea for it when I was 23, and I wouldn't finish it until I was almost 33. It is about a young woman in 18th century France who, terrified she's going to be born and buried in the same 10-meter plot, she decides to summon the old gods for a way out of her life, and she ends up praying to the gods that answer after dark. She ends up summoning basically the devil and asks for immortality, and he grants it to her with a vicious caveat, which is that she will be forgotten by everyone she meets. It is a novel set over 300 years as she tries to leave a mark on a world that can't remember her, and a novel set over 1 year in New York City when she meets a young man who does.
When you are writing with a character where you're going to have that kind of caveat, and then you know it's going to be like a looming over every scene and decision, would you talk a little bit about how that is maybe creatively challenging and then also, rewarding when you get
Writing a character like Addie is brutal because you have to just be extraordinarily aware of everything. This is a character who, the moment she steps out of view, is forgotten. So you have to choreograph scenes in very specific ways due to her awareness. She also is, over the course of the first 50 years or so, testing the boundaries of her own curse to understand its limitations. And one of the ways that you do this without, I think, it getting stale is that she makes discoveries. About 150 years in, she realizes that while she cannot leave a mark, she can be a muse for artists. She can be inspirational, meaning that like they will have the idea and believe it is theirs because they don't remember her as the source of it. And rather than get caught up in the ego of that, she is so delighted at the concept of being able to influence beauty in the world that she makes it her mission to inform art. And so you have this almost art historical documentation that happens throughout the book of these works of art that you might not realize belong to her. It's Taylor Jenkins Reid told me once that like the way to get away with historical fiction is not to write about real people, but to put your characters next to those real people, like at a party. And so Addie tends to skirt the edges of reality and real history. There are a few benchmarks across the book. Some musicians, especially, because that's a thing that she's attracted to. But in general, it's a book about a young woman moving through eternity alone. And it can be deeply sad to write about. And I think what makes that easier, what saved me during the process of it, is that this is a relentless optimist. I didn't believe into a lot of the Faustian bargains that I read about as a reader because it felt like the overwhelming sensation was ennui. And I don't know how you have an immortal who is plagued by ennui. Because in almost every Faustian bargain that I've ever read, there's a way out. Like you have an out button there somewhere that you have access to. You just have to press it. And if you're truly that ripe with ennui, if you're truly that tired of existence, you can get out of it. So for me, I had to write Addie LaRue as the opposite. I had to write her as a relentless optimist that always believed in lasting another day, in the promise that something beautiful would happen. And that was a really fun experience as someone who is not like that at all. I am a realist on good days and a pessimist on bad days. And so having to write a character and to spend so many years with a character that forced me to find small joy and to find small reasons for staying alive was its own very strange gift. I'm very, very, very passionately anti-sequel for Addie, mostly because when you write a standalone, as I said, I work backwards from my endings. I am very, very conscious of the moment I choose to make you leave the party, the moment I choose to close the book. It is not an ending. It is the point at which you can't follow. And so I was very purposeful in choosing the moment at which the reader has to say goodbye to Addie LaRue. And I think that the difference between a standalone novel that succeeds and one that doesn't is if it succeeds, you want more. And if it doesn't, you need more. And I hope that readers want more, and that's why you can reread. But I don't believe that you need more of Addie's story in order to understand the book that you've read.